Welcome to the Truthful Perspectives podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Brandon. This show is here to share the truth of God. Today's episode asks the question, will you remember? So, let's jump in. So, have you ever watched Sesame Street, or maybe your children watched Sesame Street growing up? There was a character on there, and his name was Forgetful Jones. Now, he appeared in the late 80s, early 90s, and Forgetful Jones is a cowboy and named Forgetful because, surprise, surprise, he forgets everything. His defining trait is a severe short-term memory problem, unable to remember instructions, what he was going to do, how to perform basic functions, the names of most of those he encounters, and sometimes even his own identity. Norman Stiles, who created the character, came up with the idea that he was so forgetful that he could go through the steps, of remembering his character, but the kids watching at home would actually be ahead of him. He was teaching this tool, so these kids would be, understanding what he was doing before he himself, the character, knew what he was doing. And he wanted to let the kids understand that everybody forgets, just like everybody makes mistakes. And we all do this. We all make mistakes, we forget, and we do this every day. Jesus knows that this is the case. He knows that we forget things. He knows that we have a hard time remembering things. Sometimes just basic things like remembering to grab our coffee as we go out the door, or remember to pick our clothes up off the floor. But Jesus, he is meeting with his disciples, and if you look in the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, you're going to see that Jesus asks his followers and disciples to remember at least half a dozen times in that book, according to the New Living Translation. He tells them to remember. And at the time of this recording, it's Maundy Thursday, which is the day before Jesus's crucifixion. And it's celebrated in remembrance of the day Jesus shared the Last Supper with his 12 disciples after his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And it was here that he instituted the ordinance of communion, and also served his disciples by washing the feet of everyone in the room, including Judas Iscariot, who we see later on betrays Jesus. And and so what happens is Luke's account of the Last Supper, it goes a little like this. This is what it records. It says, he took some bread and gave thanks, him being Jesus, gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in, here's the word, remembrance of me. And after supper, he took another cup of wine and said, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you, as a sacrifice for us. And this, church, is what's so important that we understand what Jesus is saying here. When Christ was lifted up the bread and the cup, he declared that everything was about to change. Everything. In the past, Passover had been a Jewish remembrance of God's salvation of the Hebrews from Egyptian captivity. But from here on out, it would also symbolize the salvation offered to every nation and every tribe in the world. He doesn't want us to forget, never forget. Observances and remembrances serve as a purpose in our confession of faith, but Jesus instructed his disciples to take their confession another step further through direct action. John's gospel records the Last Supper and includes this new commandment that Jesus calls it for his disciples. And here's what John says. He says, "So now I am giving you," or this is Jesus, "now I am giving you a new commandment: love each other, just as I have loved you. You should love one another. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." And so there's a Greek word. So the New Testament was written originally in Greek, and there was a Greek word here used uh, uh, for the word new, which implies freshness or the opposite of outworn rather than recent or different. This wasn't a commandment that was just invented, right? This is a commandment that has been around, but it's presented in a new, fresh way, that you would love one another. We might have thought that the new commandment was for us to love Jesus in an outstanding way. Instead, Jesus directed them and us to love one another, emphasizing that there should be a special presence of love among followers of Jesus. As I have loved you, right? The command wasn't a new command, but the extent of love just displayed by Jesus, by the washing the feet, that he wants them now to display for them, because he's also going to display this further on the cross. And so when Jesus is asking them to do this, he's doing this also as an example. And he says, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Jesus said that love is going to be that identifying mark. And when we love others in ways that almost comes unnatural to us because of what Jesus has done to us, we are just putting Jesus on display for others to see. It wasn't a love for the outside world. Was It wasn't that the love for the world isn't important or relevant, because we need to love, other people as well. But he says it starts first with his disciples, and there are other measurements of discipleship, but again, it comes after this love for each other. So going back to this whole forgetfulness, Jesus doesn't want us to be a bunch of forgetful Joneses out there, forgetting how to follow his commands, right? Because when it comes to working with other people and other believers, or anyone for that matter, it's easy to forget love when we've been wronged or someone frustrates us. Don't forget, never forget. Christ's Last Supper with his disciples established the observance of communion, but it also instructs us on how we are to be active. We have to actively show love to our fellow members of the body of Christ. So think about these questions as we close off today's podcast. Why are Christ's final teachings to his disciples still important for us to learn and remember today? And how well are you living out Christ's call to love and serve the people around you, inside and outside the church? Thank you for listening to the Truthful Perspectives podcast. Tune in next month as we continue to observe God's truth.